Welcome back to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Our guest this time, a returning guest in Al Castle from Pro Wrestling Illustrated. You know, I had the first issue. I still do in a Foot Locker downstairs. First issue was way back in 1979. And who was on the cover? The duo of Mil Mascaris, the man of 1,000 masks, and the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. I pulled something again. Ow. It's the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Does somebody have some balm? Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. My name is Bob Smith. How are you guys doing? We are recording this particular episode in snowy, ice, cold New York City area. It is brutal. But as Christine Ebersole once said on SNL, that's why they call it winter. I agree with you, Christine. Anyway, welcome back. As you may remember, I used to work for Pro Wrestling Illustrated many, many years ago. Well, we have a guest that works for PWI now. We welcome back Al Castle. We're going to take a look at the recent WWE special event that took place near us here in Long Island. And Al attended this event. We're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about anything else that comes to mind when it comes to pro wrestling. We go freeform on the show, and it has been a vast success, to be honest with you. We're doing really great. So we hope we're as entertaining tonight as we have been on every other recent show. So strap in, if you will. Get yourself your usual beverage of choice, be it some of the hard stuff, a soda pop, or maybe a cup of coffee. And we have a brand new look at the brand new stuff at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Check this out. We'll be right back with Al Castle. Don't go anywhere. It's too cold to go out. I mean, hey, baby, it's cold outside. Well, I reckon it's time to do a little bit of an update for the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Let's see what shows you can enjoy several times every week. They've got a veritable cornucopia of wrestling podcasts, so let's dig into it. Pretty much the flagship of WrestleCopia is the Wrestling Memory Grenade. Join host Ray Russell as he analyzes and discusses years of wrestling history from your favorite promotions. From Hulkamania to Mulkymania, from the Midnight Express to the Lex Express, they've got it all. Tune in and get a big piece of history on the Wrestling Memory Grenade. If you like nostalgia, this one's for you. The Wrestling Stoop with Bob Roop. What a legend Bob Roop is, and he welcomes you to the Wrestling Stoop as he shares stories, historical moments, and all kinds of memories from his 20-plus year career as a wrestler and booker. And you know he got wild near the end of his career. Find out all of it on the Wrestling Stoop with Bob Roop. One of the most unique wrestling podcasts anywhere is DG's Puro Wrestling Academy. Join host Dan as he travels back in time to discuss the history of pro wrestling in Japan. He's spent decades studying the world of Japanese pro wrestling. Now he offers up his historian-level knowledge to you. You'll learn something on every single show, I guarantee it. That's DG's Puro Wrestling Academy. The great Gene Jackson hosts the Retro Wrestling Review. That's RE-View. Brings in a variety of co-hosts and wrestling legends to the program as he goes back in time to watch and review pro wrestling from years goes by. Get the breakdown, hear never-before-heard stories, and feel free to watch along with them. It's worth it, let me tell you, especially if you're a USWA fan. Enjoy the Retro Wrestling Review. When this show started not all that long ago, it was called Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert. Now it's Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich. Two of the great stars from Memphis and beyond. You'll learn all about them, Hear great old school stories, stuff you've never heard before, definitely on Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich. One of my personal favorite podcasts out there is Wrestling Nostalgia with Dave Dynasty, a meat and potatoes name for a anything but a meat and potatoes show. Join him as he reminisces about pro wrestling history with a variety of legendary guests and topics. And what I like about him, he knows everything about Dick the Bruiser, Bruiser Bedlam, and the WWA. But that's only part of what you'll hear on Wrestling Nostalgia with Dave Dynasty. It was the WWF versus WCW, Raw versus Nitro, the Monday Night War, the Ratings War, the NWO, the Attitude Era. Now, there's a podcast all about it. It's called Monday Warfare, Raw versus Nitro. They break it down with episode reviews, you name it. If you want to know all about that classic ratings war, listen to Monday Warfare, Raw versus Nitro. One of the most unique podcasts you'll hear anywhere is the Other Ship podcast. It's a pop culture contest with a pro wrestling lean. Join a rotating group of co-hosts as they talk movies, sports, music, TV, food, and of course, pro wrestling. They take on various topics in roundtable discussions, special guest interviews, and other content concepts. As they say, laugh your ass off on this voyage aboard the Other Ship. New episodes are in the bag for the Captain's Corner pod. Join Captain Nick as he presents the Captain's Corner podcast. It features old school wrestling interviews and discussions, plus all the latest goings on in the world of the Captain's adventures. Nothing else quite like the Captain's Corner pod. Also on the WrestleCopia Network, the Glory Days GrappleCon cast. Hosts Barry and Captain Nick present the Glory Days GrappleCon podcast featuring memories and special interviews with wrestling stars of the past and even those of today. There's even more at WrestleCopia, a podcast called TR Shocks the World, the WCNN News, and the Power Hour. It's quite a lineup with more new podcasts joining all the time. It's the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. How do you get involved? It's pretty easy. Go to their constantly updated website, WrestleCopia.com. Click a few buttons and take a voyage into wrestling's past, present, and future. Get it all at WrestleCopia. As I hit the record button for this particular podcast, Al Castle and I have been talking about New York City for about 20 minutes. Because today, as we record this, was a day something called congestion pricing went into Manhattan. It's been the talk of New York City all day, but let's forget all that serious stuff. We have Pro Wrestling Illustrated and a fine journalist here, all in one. It's Al Castle. Hi, man. Good. Welcome back.
Yes, thank you for having me. Are you suggesting that it is unusual to be both a writer for Pro Wrestling Illustrated and a good journalist?
Yes.
No, I'm kidding. Experience.
No, I'm kidding. Even when I was with PWI, I was like the litter there. I had come from a small newspaper upstate. We had Dave Rosenbaum, I think, worked for Newsday, and Jeff Ryan in the box worked for Newsday, and Stu was on Newsday, and a lot of the others had serious editorial work. I was working for the Greene County News and the Catskill Daily Mail. The Ian that I had, like I told you before, I worked with Mike Tyson, which was just the door opener of door openers. But no, it's not mutually exclusive, not at all. In fact, once again, I want to tell our listeners and you, today's PWI is the greatest revival of anything I've ever seen. It's fantastic. It's not good. It's great. I mean, slick paper, full color, square binding, great writing, awesome photography, stats, ratings, international coverage. You're doing it good. I want to congratulate you one more time. And I'm not saying to blow smoke at you. It's legitimately good, man. It didn't matter that I worked there 50 years ago, whatever it is. You're doing a great job.
I really appreciate that. And it's good to hear. I mean, I obviously agree, but I'm not the most objective person in the world when it comes to that. But I'm going now on my 18th year. At PWI. Certainly, I've lived through the transformation. I think there were always elements of good journalism in PWI, and sometimes I'll read back on some of those issues from the 80s and 90s, your time, and there are some morsels of like really terrific journalism in there when it came to stories like the steroid trial or the death of Bruiser Brody. I mean, there was stuff that were real stories that were covered. And again, I think it's when that team got to really kind of like flex its journalistic muscles and show that you could do this. Yeah, I mean, I think I've told the story here. I remember the day that I wrote a story for Stu, this is maybe 10 years ago, and had a quote from somebody in there. I think it was Paul Heyman or something that I frankly, I made up as we did back in the day. And Stu kind of called me on it and said, like, did you actually talk to Paul for this? And I said, no, of course not. He's, well, okay, well, we're not doing that anymore, kind of thing. And that really was the end. And so I think it's been kind of like, an education for the staff, less so than the rest of the team that I think came on in most cases after that era. And all they've known is kind of like the legit journalism, PWI, but also for readers who, some of whom I think would be surprised to know that, like, yeah, what you're reading in there is the real thing. And it means a real amount of work for us. Before, putting together a story was, and it was fun, this, right? Like, you sit down and like, what can I have this guy say? And what can I have that guy say? And who can I throw in here? And you could still have all those voices in a feature for the magazine, but it's going to require talking to all those people, so yeah, a lot more work, but super rewarding. We're just coming off of kind of the busy season for us, because we go from the PWI 500 to the women's 250 to the tag team 100, which is kind of my baby, to the year-end awards, which is the next magazine coming out. So it's kind of like this hellacious 4 issues. And
I have a logistics question. Now,
Sure.
back in my day, young man, back in those days when we sent our finished product to the printer, it would take 6 weeks to hit the newsstand. Is it faster now? Is it?
It feels that way. Yeah, I mean, Kevin McElvaney would probably have a better answer. But sometimes I'm surprised from when I file my column or whatever I did for a magazine to when, the magazine is in my mailbox, how quick the turnaround is. And it feels like a lot shorter than, I don't know exactly what it is, but it feels like less than a month sometimes. So it might depend on the issue. I know we're doing more per year than we have, and sometimes we've squeezed in a few more per year. So yeah, we're really cranking. It also is like coming up with more ideas, because when there were fewer issues between, like, all the staples, the 500, the women's issue, the year-end awards, when we were doing the poll, which I think we stopped doing, we got away from, it was like you had these 10 polls for all the issues. And now that we've got more issues, it's like and then it's a cool challenge. Every once in a while, it's like, what are we going to do with this? And that's how we've come up with like fun stuff, like bringing back supercards. And we've had like sort of Japanese focused issues and independent focused issues. So yeah, it really is Kevin's vision. And I think he's doing a great job.
And I think you guys are brave. I think I was talking to Brian about this, or it may have been you, but I think it was Brian Solomon, in that you will feature on your covers and in major coverage people who aren't necessarily in either in AEW or WWE. You've been really, really digging deep into the indies, unlike we wouldn't do in the day. We were afraid of not selling magazines. You'll even have people on your covers that people go, "Oh, Mustafa, really?"
Yeah.
That's I got to give you credit. You are looking at it, as Matt Brock used to say, without fear or favor.
Yeah, and I think it is definitely a change just from a few years ago. And I do think it's kind of a different sort of strategy where the thought before, and it's, I think it still bleeds into some decision making today is, who is mainstream, who, if you put their face on a magazine, is going to get some attention on a newsstand. But I think probably the reality is that there is a ceiling to that, right? What the universe of people who are going to buy a magazine is. can you expand that universe by catering to some niches, right? So you put Matt Cardona on the cover, and right, maybe not everybody knows who Matt Cardona is, but maybe all the Matt Cardona fans come out and now buy it, right? Because it is a collector's edition for the Cardona fans. You give a little bit of one place, take from the other. But more than anything, again, I think it's a reflection of Kevin just sort of going with his heart and his gut on some of this stuff.
But you know what? I think he struck on something there, and I'll tell you why. I think today's fan is vastly different than the fan when I was working there. And here's why. I think the fans are a younger demographic than they were when I was working there. And secondly, I think they're more keyed into the indies because they tend to know who people are, let's say, when they enter AEW. Whereas if they enter WWE, who's that? But AEW will take a wrestler who was in the indies and bring him in with the same persona, same name. So I think the fans, recent attendances are just blowing me away how well the indies are doing right now.
Yeah.
And that's wrestling's best kept secret right now in that they're drawing. I just heard of 2 sellouts of local East Coast shows here. So I think that today's fan is more keyed into developing talent than they would have been back in the day when they saw a picture of Ox Baker. When is Ox Baker coming to my territory? That type of thing. Now, wrestlers skew younger and smaller, and the fans are also younger and really into booking matches in their head. And I think it's a natural progression.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're joking about you feeling like the old man. I feel like the old man often at the magazine, because when there are these discussions about independent stars, maybe we're putting together the 500 and some people start floating some names of independent people, and I don't know who they are, right? I mean, like that is the reality. And I think it's also very much like a change in the wrestling culture where, you talk about like the Ox Baker days, and I think about what independent wrestling was even in the 80s and into the early 90s when I was reading the magazines. I don't know that there was like that. It wasn't the chic, cool thing to do. It was sort of like, there was less of it. And I don't think they're even calling it independent wrestling, right? I mean, it was a kind of like low rent, and it would be, whatever. And there's still some of this, but it would, Honky Tonk Man, 4 years after being fired by WWE, or Greg Valentine. Some of it is just sort of like the change in. And some of it overlaps with like comic book culture and sort of saying it lovingly, nerd culture, that kind of thing. It's hip, right? To be like the independent wrestling fan and follow the indies. Again, when there's conversation at PWI among the writers who are younger than me, I feel like the old out of touch guy when they're all kind of talking about like this new independent sensation.
But you're right about how the indies were when I was working, because they would always have guys between contracts in your quote main event. It's SD Jones versus Bob Orton Jr. or something. And I was right, because they were in between things. But you could see the younger talent on the undercard. I remember young Cheetah Kid, who later became part of Public Enemy, Ted Petty. So it's like I saw a lot of guys as they were in their formative years. I saw the Hardys before they were anything. People like that. So it's like, that's where it's different. They used to have to rely on, oh boy, Tony Atlas is coming to town. Or like you said, Greg Valentine's coming to town. Now, I think they build brands just like the majors do. We're CGW, whatever they call it. Here's what we have. Here's their style. And they don't even advertise names on the posters sometimes. It's just pro wrestling is coming to town.
And the ex-WWE guy, I mean, depends who it is, but they might get booed out the building, right? I mean, if you put a Braun Strowman on a CZW card or a Game Changer card, what do you think the reaction would be that he'd get?
But that's a fascinating question. Who you never know.
Yeah.
You just don't know. Today's wrestling fan is miles different than especially when I was a kid. We used to cheer the good guys. That was wrestling to us. We hated the bad guys.
I mean, we could end up in a whole like philosophical discussion.
Yeah, we are. You can go on. You can go on for hours with things. That's what makes wrestling so fascinating, and the way it's changing and evolving. Speaking of changing and evolving, the reason I asked you to come here, as I knew you had told me you were going to the Saturday Night's Main Event broadcast, which was at the Nassau Coliseum on December 14th in Long Island here. I wanted you to come on and just give me your impressions of what a major WWE event is like to attend live now. First of all, I know it's Number one, it's expensive.
Yeah.
It's that's a $12 ticket, I think, is a thing of the past. You get a lot for your money in terms of presentation, staging, music. What was it like? Tell me how you went, where you sat, anything you want to say about it. I know you literally paid for tickets, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, well, I mean, without saying too much, there's some changes in WWE where over the last several years where it is even as a member of the working press, it is not as easy as to get tickets as it used to be. So yeah, buying a lot more, which also means going to a lot less shows, and not the least of which is probably going to be WrestleMania this year, which is, at least at the moment, absolutely out of my price range, and I've gone to, I've been to, I don't know, 18 WrestleManias, something like that. And the last 5 or 6 in a row with my whole family. And, it's not cheap, but it's always been doable. It's kind of the family vacation. This year, forget it. I mean, that you're talking $1,000 a ticket.
In the 1980s, a fellow reporter and I at the Catskills Daily Mail decided to drive from Greene County all the way into Manhattan to see Madison Square Garden wrestling on a Monday night. All right. The Piper Hogan era. We showed up, got front row seats, and they were about $17 a piece.
Yeah.
Something like
even
that.
Adjusted for inflation, it's
right. Now it's a different era, but I just want to say this. Recently, I said, I haven't been to a live show in a while. Let me check out. They're coming to the Barclays Center. Let me check out prices. And they had second row seats for $1,700 each.
Yeah, yeah, and the $1,000 tickets I'm telling you about for WrestleMania are they're not even close to the floor. You're talking the nosebleeds, the worst seats in the house, and that's kind of the buy. I mean, I'm in the secondary market, you could get in for $900, maybe something like that with fees. It is completely out of I think most people's price range, especially if you have a family. If I was doing it alone, I think I'd be willing to pony up $1,000. But I've got a wife and 2 kids. It's you multiply it times 4, and it just becomes undoable.
But there's something I always think about when it comes to ticket pricing, particularly here in New York. I always complain, and I used to be a basketball writer. I always complain, Knicks tickets are too expensive. No, they're not. They sell it every game. They're too expensive for me. Right. That's the difference.
Yeah. And you're right. And that's where it is a little hard to begrudge WWE or any live event promoter, who doesn't want to leave money on the table. If you sell tickets for WrestleMania each year for, I know an average price is $400, and you sell out the place in 30 minutes, what that tells you is that you could charge more, right?
Yeah.
And push it and push it. Now, at some point, you could get into the discussion of what is the right thing to do for business and what is the right thing to do just sort of in general. Because you look at and maybe it's not the best example because I know that this is a family product anyway, but like a UFC has priced out the blue collar fan for years now. I mean, you can't get in for, especially here in New York, for less than $600 for any event. To WWE's credit, even with the price increases. And I'll even give them the credit now up into including that Saturday Night's Main Event show. I mean, maybe it's kind of being flexible with the definition of affordable, but you could get into, and I think I did pay in the neighborhood of $60, something like that, $60 to $80 per ticket for not great seats, not the worst seats in the building, but not very good. To me, that's not completely unreasonable. It's hard to find much of anything that you could go to live these days.
Yeah, that's cheap for anything now. Yeah.
Movie tickets are $20 for live event, and you ask what the modern wrestling, modern WWE live show experience is off of this event, because in some ways it's the worst event to take that into consideration because it was not meant to look like a modern show. And I say that somewhat, but the whole, and it's what made it so great was that it was a time machine, and I grew up in this area in the 80s, was a fan around when the first Saturday Night's Main Event, came to Long Island, and, I was 7 years old and didn't realize that I was a 30-minute drive from there. And as a lot of wrestling fans are, I think, very nostalgic, especially for like that 80s and early 90s era. And it just felt like something that passed me by that I never got to do. And it's sort of like you just sort of accept that, like, we'll never get to do that. So it was really like special to go to a Saturday Night's Main Event in Nassau Coliseum, the home of the first one, with Animotion's Obsession blaring over the speakers, and Jesse Ventura on color, and Coco Beware and Tito Santana and Greg Valentine at ringside, and the refs with the light blue shirts and the bow ties and the red, white, and blue ring ropes. I mean, it was a love letter to 80s and 90s wrestling, which I think is so great because over the years, both WWE and other wrestling promotions, I think, have sought to capitalize on nostalgia, but have done it in kind of a patronizing way, sort of making fun of that era versus kind of like really embracing it. And I think this was done really lovingly, the whole thing, up to and including having Jesse on color. I've been watching wrestling for about 40 years now. I can count on, probably a one hand how many times I've gotten truly emotional watching wrestling. At the beginning of that show, with the intro, which was so great, and they sort of teased that they weren't going to play, that original theme song by Animotion, and then screen goes out for black for a second, and then they come in with the song and the original graphics and Mean Gene's voice in the back, and I got legitimately emotional watching it. I mean, it was so great, and it was cool to be there with my kids. I loved it, but I think to what you're asking, it also was very much a modern WWE show in all the good ways and bad ways because of the Saturday night's main event setting. In some ways, I wanted to look less modern. I think they found a good balance, but I would have loved to have seen the big fabric banners hanging with the Saturday Night Main Event logo, and a few other touches, some more kind of like backstage stuff, which was really kind of the signature of Saturday Night's Main Event back in the day, kind of the goofy backstage segments with Mean Gene. But they had whatever it was, 2 hours to fill, and I think they did a great job, and it was just the first one, and I think they've got a real franchise on their hands now with the return of Saturday Night's Main Event. Now, I've heard kind of like mixed reviews about how well it did. Some people looked at the numbers they did, and I think it was like in the neighborhood of 2 million viewers, and some people saw it as a success, and others thought like, well, that's only what a Raw does every week. So that's
but you know what? Saturday night TV is a test pattern on the networks now.
Yeah.
Nobody's watching Saturday night TV on CBS or ABC either. The fact that it did 2 million may look bad, but what was in that time slot before that?
Sure. Yeah.
They show 5-year-old Saturday Night Live reruns at 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
This is not a prime thing for NBC. I think if they attracted 2.1 million eyeballs, that's about 500,000 more than they would have with just something else on.
Yeah. I just hope they really stick to it because, they tried the Saturday Night's Main Event revival, whatever it was, 15, 16 years ago, and it didn't really hit. For one thing, the business is in a much better place now than it was then. But also, I think this captured, and I don't know how much this is even worth. I mean, it's worth something to nostalgics like me and you, but for the younger generation, I don't know how much. Maybe they just want a good wrestling show, but it was also that. I mean, it was a fantastic wrestling show, loaded up with great matches and just a blast. Has it been a while since you've been to a live WWE show?
Yeah, it's been quite a while. I can't remember when the last one was. Really? I think the last WWE event I paid money to see was at MSG, the Hall of Fame with Bruno Sammartino and Cactus Jack.
That's
I think it's the last. I think that's the last time I attended any sort of WWE event in person.
Yeah. I mean, as far as experience, there are some really cool innovations. I mean, I think for the live fan, they do more with the downtime, whether it's like different videos and segments that they show on the big screen or interactive stuff with your phone, different contests, or they'll do social media things. One thing that I think is really cool, and I don't know if other entertainment businesses are doing this, but being able to order merch on your phone and then going to pick it up,
yes. Yeah.
Like those long, I love that. I mean, I think that's great.
They do that in MLB now too.
Yeah,
you can get food delivered, or you can get some merchandise. You just order and pick it up, right?
And I don't know if they do the food delivery, but the Coliseum, I don't know if the last time you met the Coliseum. Coliseum is a nightmare to get anything because, I mean, it's about the oldest arena in the area now, right?
Yep.
And and it's the only one where everything feeds out to one lobby, different than the Garden where they've got like a lobby for every floor. And that's pretty much the way most places are now, whether it's the UBS Arena or Barclays. But everything in the Coliseum dumps out to one floor and, one beer and pretzel guy. Where I went to an AEW show last year. It was the pay-per-view World's End in December of 2023. There are literally people who got online at the beginning of the show and missed the first hour of the show, getting a hot dog or a beer, which I never got. So
really,
I will not wait on the line for anything.
No, I'm with you in that regard. Now, let me ask you some logistical stuff. Now, you had upper tank seats. You say they weren't the best, but they weren't the worst. I am assuming they also put the action during a match on big screens.
Yes.
Were you doing the up and down with the eyes, or could you was it worth it to look at the ring? We'll put it that way.
Where I was, it's a funny thing. Like it sort of depends on the camera shot. You ever go to what is known as the Westbury Music Fair? I forget what they call it these days.
It's back.
It is Westbury
renamed
Music
it. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It was whatever NYCB theater or whatever.
My favorite theater at the NYC area. I will go to see anything at Westbury. I know the people that run it. I've known people who worked in the behind the scenes. I love the venue. That's my jam. I love.
Yeah, Westbury. I like it too.
This means nothing, but they had wrestling there a few times. They had TNA there.
They did. I went to those shows. Those were really fun to see. I remember the guys couldn't do spots off the top rope because they would hit the lighting ring, which is like a foot above them. But there they've got screens. Very small screens. They're basically, televisions on top of, dangling by the stage for the show. But the camera angle is so far back that, it doesn't ever make sense to watch the screen because you'll get anywhere in the building, you'll get a better view just watching the stage. It's sort of similar to it at wrestling. It's like if it's a close up, you'll watch the big screen.
But at least in my next question, you have upper tank tickets at a football stadium for WrestleMania. Can you see anything, or does the ring look like, as I always put it, bugs on a cracker?
Yes. If you look at WrestleMania, and I usually, I'm big on I want to be in the building. I'm never like a front row guy. And that's how I get to see a lot of stuff because I will buy the worst ticket in the house. I'll buy the seat behind the stage for whatever act I want to see. But for WrestleMania, if you don't have a good seat, there are ants in the ring. And usually there's no shortage of screens, and at some buildings and I think Madison Square Garden does this in their very upper deck now. They've got screens essentially like in your section, right? It's almost like your own TV for your section. So you have it very close up. At WrestleMania, you have to, but really, I don't care. I mean, like I just want to be in the building. You want it's the same thing for like live music, right? I mean, if you want to hear the song played perfectly, stay home and listen to the CD. If you want that, that communal feel of watching something with 20,000 other people, then that's what you go to a concert for.
Let me ask you another thing about what it's like. As I watch Raw and SmackDown and the stadium shows on Peacock, my first thought, and I think this at home listening to it, is this is ear jarring.
Yeah.
It seems very loud. Is it the same way live?
Yes. I think less so than 10 or even 20 years ago, because WWE in particular, I think, has pulled back on the pyro. I think for one, it was very expensive. And so I remember, the big one was Kane. You ever go to see Kane wrestle live? And those big fire cannons that they would explode were so loud and jarring and hot. I remember being like on the other side of the arena and you'd feel the heat from those flames. And when my kids were little and we'd take them, you'd always have to like brace them and because they were going to get scared. There's less of that now. And I think where they use it, it's used like strategically. I like loud. So maybe it's just me. I don't mind the volume at all. One thing that you're always missing, this has always been the case from the live event experience, is commentary, right? And
right.
That, especially in a real big match, the WrestleMania main event or something like that, makes all the difference. And in fact, I mean, that's maybe not a regret, but one thing that I've missed going to so many WrestleManias is that great commentary. I mean, I guess I could come home and watch it again, but I don't know that I often do. I also don't know how great commentary is these days. This isn't the days of, Jim Ross and Gordon Soley and those guys.
No, it's not. But I never, it's funny. Wrestling's a different animal. I never care who's calling a baseball game, but for some reason, I've always cared about who's calling a wrestling match.
Yeah.
And I think it has to do with the announcers and commentators who really know the psychology as opposed to, Jack Reynolds in the 70s used to never know the names of the holes, ever. Oh, a flying smashy leg lift. He would just make up stuff. He didn't even, but back in the 70s, they didn't give every move a name.
Right.
That was the difference.
But there's something to be said for that too, and actually that ties back to Saturday night's main event because you had Jesse Ventura there, who and he only called one match. He called the main event, but he is kind of like rusty, obviously not following the product that closely. And you put him back in that chair, and he defaults to the way they called wrestling 30 and 35 years ago. And it was sort of great. I mean, it was like a blast from the past that he was, the way he would take jabs at a baby face for anything that he saw as, less than admirable, or calling out hypocrisy and that kind of thing.
Cody Rhodes, smashing Kevin Owens in the chair. Is he going to cheat?
Yeah, right.
Because that's what he did in the day. He would accuse the baby faces of cheating.
Great. Yeah.
Yes, that's pure Jesse right there.
And also, when somebody would, and this is, not it's not my podcast, so I think I can dump on AEW as much as I want without getting in trouble. Jesse is from an era when you weren't as desensitized to moves, right? So when somebody would just lay in it was the women's match, right? And I forget what the women's match was, but somebody took like a real stiff shot at the other one, and Jesse's like, wow, I don't know how did she survive that shot? It is great, to have kind of that different set of eyes who was appreciating it differently and is really kind of he's selling the moves, even where sometimes the wrestlers don't. So that was great. I mean, I think look, was he spot on after being off the mic for 30 something years? No, obviously not. But I think he absolutely brought something to the table. And I think with a few more reps, I think we could largely have the old Jesse Ventura back.
You know what? It added realism to what you were watching in my eyes because, he was speaking off the cuff. They allowed him to say, I think, anything he wanted to say. That's brilliant because you know what? He always had the timing. He was always into the match psychology. You couldn't put anything over on him. And he would notice things that most color commentators didn't. That's what made him the best of all time. For instance, it's like he would accuse, like I say, a Tito Santana or a Chico Santana of if he's going to break the rules, what's so bad with Adrian Adonis broke those rules? He would notice and call out things like that. Yeah, I guarantee you that stuff was not pre-scripted at all.
No, because he also was making some mistakes. He was getting some names wrong. And Kevin Owen, he said a few times, and a couple other things. I think he called was it Dominique Mysterio or something like that? So, but that's, the guy is not watching wrestling that much these days, and that's not what you brought him there for. All that said, I'll say WWE's announcing in general without Jesse there has gotten a lot better over the last a few years, basically since Vince McMahon got out of these guys' ears. I mean, I think where you could notice it the most is with Michael Cole, who for so long, I think, really struggled to get respect in wrestling because he was sort of post Jim Ross, who's got all this love and adoration, respect from fans, but we only saw Michael Cole, kind of overproduced Michael Cole. And now with Vince McMahon out of his headset last few years, we've seen kind of like Michael Cole unleashed, and he's really good. And I think that goes without saying. And it's nice to kind of see him get his flowers the last year or so, where I think people are starting to talk about Cole as an all-time great announcer. I think it also helps him that over on the other channel, you've got Jim Ross and Tony Schiavone and these guys who have a lot of respect, and I want to be diplomatic here, but maybe hurting their credibility a little bit, calling and really selling for a product that I think in their heart of hearts that they know is substandard.
As Geddy Lee once said, $50 is $50.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to besmirch either of those fine gentlemen, but I tend to agree with what you just said. I don't know how you can justify, and it justifies. This is wrestling. This isn't anything to get all up about, as they used to also say in the old days. But it just, to me, seems almost incongruous. Is that once in a while, I think a Shivani will throw his hands in the air, going, "What the heck did I just see?"
Yeah.
That's what I like. That's what we need more of from the veteran announcers. Excalibur is another whole ball of wax, and the others that were there. I just think that they should be well within the rights to go, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
In the 70s, they'd say stuff was ridiculous. In
Yeah,
the 80s, they would.
It's tough, and it's tough when you are AEW now, and they're in such a different job, Shivani and Ross, than they were just a few years ago when AEW was the hot product, and they could go out there and they helped to give credibility to AEW. They were believable because they were good announcers calling a good product, and that Jim Ross and Tony Schiavone were calling this product again and gave it credibility. But now, you think about what hurt Schiavone's credibility for so long, and for a while he had a really bad reputation, and I don't think it was a reflection of Schiavone as much as the product he was calling in WCW in those dying days, and having to shill for a really substandard product for those last few years of WCW. So when he came back with a really good AEW product, it was kind of this feel-good story that, he kind of got his reputation back, and not to make too much of it, because AEW is fine. It's certainly not, WCW in the last few years. But I think it is the case that I can't believe in my heart of hearts that Schiavone and Ross don't watch some of this stuff that they're calling and roll their eyes and think, really, did we just watch somebody inject a syringe in somebody else's mouth as finisher to a pay-per-view? Did somebody just set somebody on fire with a flamethrower or do a spot with an actual cinder block? I mean, that's garbage, and I think they know that's garbage.
And what's killing me with the garbage too is that I worked for WCW magazine with Colin Bowman. That also the original one with PWI. But I worked on the second edition of WCW magazine. And back in those days, TNT and the Turner networks were really, really anal about what they would allow on television and on the pay-per-views. Language, too much violence. I mean, Dusty Rhodes got canned for having a spike in the eye from the Road Warriors once.
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, so now it's almost like anything goes. And I'm all for like foreign objects and getting hit with something that you shouldn't be getting hit with. But, jabbing people with scissors and stuff. I mean, scissors?
Yeah.
Kids watch wrestling. I don't want to sound like an old fuddy-duddy, but anything that has the appearance of possibly being lethal is a step too far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw, pull the curtain back. We're recording this on as Raw is about to debut on Netflix, and they released today a really slick package that is supposed to be the cold opening for Raw that Triple H is narrating, and it's really well done. And they sort of tell, embraces the dirty word that Vince McMahon wouldn't for years, wrestling, and shows the lineage of wrestling from Gorgeous George through today. Triple H talks in narration about how, in its core, what this has always been is about heroes and villains, and he says baby faces and heels. I think that's one thing that AEW may be too cute for its own good. It thinks that they've sort of evolved beyond that. And that's what I think has sort of made a mess of things over there. I heard Stevie Richards. Remember Stevie Richards?
Sure, absolutely.
He's got a great podcast now, and I listen to him a lot. And he talked about how, and I think it was also dissecting an AEW video, the worst words that can be uttered like backstage at a wrestling show in a locker room is, what's never been done before, and that's for a reason. It's like, right, a syringe in the mouth. They've never done that before. Yeah, right, because that would be really idiotic and nobody would buy. And I do think, kind of going full circle again with the whole Saturday Night's Main Event thing, is that there is something to, like, in some ways, wrestling is always going to evolve, and it's a good thing. But you do have to be careful about where you evolve and how you evolved. And I think there are some tropes that you, by and large, need to follow, not just in wrestling, but in storytelling in general. Like my kid's, aspiring comic artist, and he tells me how he studied the hero's journey, right, which is like the structure for a lot of storytelling. And this stuff all works. When wrestling promoters start to think that it's sort of like passe to have heroes and villains and baby faces and heels, I think that's when it just kind of becomes a mess. Now they could take different shapes than they did before, and we have seen them evolve. I'm not saying it needs to be the Grand Wizard or something like that. But look at the work Drew McIntyre is doing. He's doing the best work of his career, and he's just a jerk, right? I mean, that's
right.
He's a grumpy, mean jerk, and he's doing the best work of his career.
I agree with that. Wrestling works. There's always bad guys have always threatened good guy wrestlers. There's been really violent, bloody matches where people get hurt and stretchered out and stuff like that. I just have always felt that it's a step too far to imply, I'm going to kill you.
Yeah, that's when I get out of it, and every once in a while, some wrestler will think, what if I said I'm going to actually kill you? And the second you hear that, it takes you out of it. Yeah.
TNA has already had 2 murder angles.
Yeah,
literally.
WWE's had a few. Randy Orton burned Bray Wyatt alive in the ring. Remember, he poured gasoline all over him and set him on fire. And
it's the worst thing I ever watched.
Oh yeah,
I mean, everybody was beneath that. That was beneath everybody that was involved. I mean, it was just that was pandemic desperation is what that was.
Yep, and it was. I was thinking about this earlier. I mean, it was the worst WWE I think I'd ever seen. Those last few years for Vince McMahon, and maybe in contrast, that's why Triple H's WWE is getting so much praise, because it really follows, and again, because of the pandemic, maybe he deserves to be graded on the curve. But what we saw out of McMahon in the last few years was the worst of the worst. I mean, there was literally,
it was dreadful.
There were matches where you would win. Remember, there's a Bray Wyatt Braun Strowman match where to win you had to drown somebody in a lake.
Yeah, the cinematic matches, the bit where Seth Rollins took out Rey Mysterio's eyeball. I mean,
that was how you won the match. That was a remove an eyeball match.
Good Lord, that's Vince all the way. Triple H is the Lorne Michaels of wrestling. Lorne Michaels somehow always gets the very best talent to be on Saturday Night Live. He finds them, nurtures them, and makes them stars. I think Triple H is doing that job right now and doing it very, very well. I mean, I don't look at anybody in the WWE roster and go, they don't belong here. They all do.
Yeah, I totally agree. And for the first time in a long time, taking that one step further, there's always going to be exceptions, but there's also not a lot of guys who you look at in WWE right now, or women, and you think, they're really not using her well or him well. Like they're wasting this person. There's always, you can have your favorites that you wish would be put on the fast track. But I think by and large, Triple H appreciates what he has and is making good use of everybody. And not to be hyperbolic, but I've been watching wrestling, whatever it is now, 40 years. There have been times I've enjoyed it more because of how old I was or where I was in my life, or, the way you enjoy something when you're 7 or 8 or you're 6, the Attitude Era when I was a teenager and, Sable's out there taking her top off. Like, yeah, that was like really fun. But sort of like objectively, I don't know that I've ever seen a better WWE product than, top to bottom than right now. And again, it doesn't mean that I'm devouring every second of it. I don't sit down and watch a 3-hour Raw the way I used to sit down and watch all of Raw is War in the mid to late 90s. Whenever I watch WWE, it's pretty damn good. There's not, you don't have that pull your hair out your head like this is so stupid. There's almost none of it. Everything makes sense. The action is good. The characters are deep and fully formed and smart. The promos are good. They are scripted, but don't feel over scripted. And I do think it's Triple H. And I do think that Triple H is uniquely suited for this job. I'd argue maybe more than anybody in the world for a few reasons, right? One is he was a fan, right? Growing up in the Northeast, kind of in between our generations, right? I mean, so I imagine came up watching 70s and 80s wrestling, but he knows what it is to be sold a ticket to wrestling, right? To watch something and be so compelled that you're going to spend your money to go watch a show or not, right? Or something that didn't land and you're not interested and you pass. Then he was a wrestler on the lowest levels, doing jobs in WCW and in, mid 90s WWF when they were working high school gyms and business was down, and was a top guy in DX in the Attitude Era, the biggest boom period. And then beyond all of that, he married a McMahon, right? I mean, so he is in the inner circle. He has seen it from that side too, and also he's just grown up. I was watching a video that he did, I think, with Sports Illustrated promoting Raw on Netflix. And there was a discussion. I think they asked him, like, is there anybody who you wouldn't bring back? I think he was honest without naming names, saying that, yeah, there's some people maybe it's harder to kind of make amends with than others. But he talked about with like a CM Punk that when that conversation started after him leaving the company 10 years ago, that what he told Punk is, I'm not the same guy I was 10 years ago. And I hope you're not either. And if either of us is, we did something wrong. And I think that shows, because remember, as much as like Triple H is sort of loved now for what he's doing for the product, he was hated as like this real political backstabber during his run as a top guy in the early 2000s. I mean, he had this reputation for holding guys down and stuff like that. And it does seem, whether it was fatherhood or marriage or a health scare that a few years back with his heart, and maybe it's just me being naive and maybe he's still all those things. But when I hear the guy, and it's not even thinking that he's an especially good dude or a nice dude, but I see like a real leader, somebody with a real mind for it, somebody really tuned in a way that Vince McMahon maybe never was, and at the least wasn't for a long time, could really connect with what fans want. That's absent, I think, almost everywhere. I mean, I think that's a real issue, again, on AEW, where so much of the product feels like self-indulgent and not what fans want.
One thing about this Triple H era that I think a lot of people haven't noticed, but I notice it on every episode, it's a simple word: continuity.
Yeah.
They're remembering things that happened the week before, a year before,
10 years ago,
6 months before, 10 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
They have never been this, I don't want to say historical perspective, but they're remembering things. They're remembering the rationales for feuds. They're remembering, like, the whole Kevin Owens thing. They're going back in time.
Yeah.
The Roman Reigns thing, they're going back in time. It's like there are logical reasons for the rancor. That's really good. I mean, I don't know who's doing it or who's behind it. I don't know if it's a Triple H touch, but I'm sure he doesn't mind it, because you know what? It all started when they mentioned the word professional wrestling at last year's WrestleMania, and all of a sudden they're looking back instead of just the last episode. You know what I mean? They always had a problem with continuity, not anymore.
I don't know if he's still there, but I remember reading that they hired a guy from like Marvel or something, and that was his sole job, was to be like the continuity guy. And yeah, you're totally right. And they did an angle some weeks back with, it was Sami Zayn and Seth Rollins. I think when Sami Zayn was trying to recruit Seth to be part of the team at Survivor Series, and Seth said he'd never work with Roman Reigns, and how could you trust Roman Reigns? And Seth said, or Sami said essentially, like, are you forgetting that you created Roman Reigns when you hit him with a chair 10 years ago? And it's exactly what you're talking about. Man, they did a callback to something 10 years ago. And you do stuff like that all the time. There was a great a back and forth promo last week with a Punk and Seth Rollins that hit on a lot of history. And what I think that they're doing so great right now too, which is a really difficult to do and has been tried for generations and generations is to ride that line of work and shoot in a way that isn't insulting to fans. Where you've seen it done badly is where, the worst example was early 2000s WCW and talking about, guys doing jobs and laying down for each other and, in the middle of a promo, which is the worst. But you see, like, what CM Punk, and I think he's a real master out of it, does it. His promos feel authentic. They feel heartfelt. They feel like shoots, but also they do nothing to blur that line. At the end of the day, he's still selling a fight in the ring, and making you want to watch this fight. It's just great.
But like you just mentioned, like they'll mention that you hit him with a chair 10 years ago, and when he says it, the fans went, "Whoa!" You know what? It's great. Well, it's great. It's the fans remember, but WWE never used to. But when you're bringing up stuff that jogs the memory of the most loyal fans, those are the ones at ringside.
Yeah.
You're gonna get a pop from it, and they always do.
Sure. Vince McMahon was notorious for years, and I think especially maybe the last 10 years or so, of ripping up scripts, hours before showtime, and so, I mean, they literally build up stuff announce stuff for the next week's Raw, and then that week came and it was just like, nah, we're not doing any of this, and zero continuity. And it made it really frustrating and unwatchable. I think you're seeing some of that, maybe not to that extent, but again in AEW now, where they'll go in one direction and then they'll build the feud between two guys and never pay it off and just drop it, or I think the worst example of it was the MJF Adam Cole feud from last year that built and then climaxed at the end of the year, and then it was just dropped. And then when they picked it up mid-year, for some reason they reversed roles, and the babyface was the heel and the heel was the babyface, and by then nobody wanted to see it.
Yeah. They are wasting the talent they do have. I mean, MJF is not as over as he was a year ago or before he went away. That's for dang dang sure. He is just another face. You can't flip-flop these guys so much. Especially if there's no rationale behind it. If there's no logical reason for a turn, why turn?
Yeah.
And they do it all the time.
That one is really puzzling because MJF was the best heel in wrestling for a while. And the expectation was always, rightfully so, that what this pays off in is an eventual babyface turn where he'll be the biggest babyface in wrestling, because now it's like when Piper turned in the 80s, remember, in WWF, he's our jerk, right? And now the fans are embracing this guy who is still a jerk, but it's what we're seeing to some extent now with Roman Reigns. And they did it, and I thought it worked pretty well. I mean, I think MJF was pretty over as a babyface in the second half of 2023, just to switch him back again, and now he's just a watered down version of the old heel MJF. And they've done this with so many guys. I mean, you think of and granted, he just won the Continental Classic for whatever that's worth, but Okada, they got Okada. I don't know what they spent on Okada for him to be a guy in the background, playing comedy for the Young Bucks. It's insane,
None of this makes any sense, and I hate to be honest, but that's why I avoid it. Since the inception, since the very first episode of AEW, something smelled funny. I can't put my finger on it. There was an overwhelming... Well, the first thing they did as a promotion that they should never have done, bring in people from small indies and let them keep their gimmick. No.
Why is that? Because that's what you're saying is a very Vince McMahon way of doing things.
It's assuming that the fan who would tune into TNT to watch the program knows who they are. No, they don't. They need to be introduced. They need to be nurtured. They need to be built. You just don't bring in a Chris Statlander from Creative Pro and say, you all know who she is. No, they don't. When you go from the indies into a major television network, you need to be introduced. You need to be coddled. You need to be cooked before you're served, shall we say?
Yeah, and I think in a microcosm that's everything that is my frustration with AEW is that it is an indie with a big budget, right?
Right, right.
And there's stuff that people like about that. You know, if you're there for work rate, if you're there for star ratings, you're gonna love AEW. You know, because they're gonna do a lot of flashy moves, but there is zero discipline, right? I mean, they just everybody goes out. I remember this, you know, from Ring of Honor when I used to go to Ring of Honor shows, and at first there was like this novelty of like, man, these matches are also good, you know. And then when you're 4 hours in, and it is the fifth 40-minute match in a row, and it's big move, kick out, big move, kick out. There was a match that I went to see. I went to this year's Grand Slam at Flushing Meadow, the stadium show that AEW does every year. Which the first few years they did it was an amazing show. I mean, the first year they opened the show with Kenny Omega and Bryan Danielson, and it had like a WrestleMania vibe, and it was a great match. And it shows you, I mean, just I think how much the product has really fallen off since then. But there was a match on that show that was the Young Bucks versus Kyle Fletcher and Will Ospreay. And as I'm watching it, I both thought this is one of the worst matches I've seen all year, and I knew that it was going to get 6 stars from Dave Meltzer because it was gigantic pile driver off the top rope out to the arena floor on the concrete, roll him into the ring, 1, 2, kick out. And then, you know, again, just gigantic move after gigantic move after gigantic move. It became laughable. And then, you know, I forget what the finish was, but it was just like a move. And that is AEW now. You know, AEW is just a collection. They're just trying to pop Dave Meltzer now, and Meltzer's giving them what they want.
The 38 pinfall attempt match is going to kill this whole thing dead in a doornail. Hey, you can't do it. Stop it. Yeah. Stop it.
Yeah.
And you know what?
That's in the middle of a card, right?
There was never a Led Zeppelin concert where Jimmy Page played all his best licks on every song.
Right.
On occasion, he would burn, and then he'd be melodic, and then he'd be acoustic, and then he'd bring out the electric guitar again. You needed different flavors. So does a wrestling card.
Yeah. Ironically, just picking up my kid from school a couple hours ago, we were driving home from school, and I was telling him about Raw Netflix. We were just chatting. And he said, you know, is there any wrestler out there who, you know, wrestles every match like it's WrestleMania? And I told him, like, I can't think of anybody, and I wouldn't want that. You know, like if there are wrestlers who say, and I think it's kind of like this trite thing that a lot of wrestlers say that, like, you know, whether I'm in front of 100 fans or 100,000 fans, I'm going to, you know, give my all. And I think to some extent that's true. But if a wrestler is truly doing that, he's doing something wrong, right? And the example I think of, and the name I gave him is Cody Rhodes. And I think what you want out of a wrestler, and I think Cody does, is always give a good effort, right? I mean, don't dog it. But you've got your house show match, right? You know, where you maybe do a couple of near falls, and then you hit your finish and you go home. And then you've got your WrestleMania main event match. And if you're at the same gear for both of them, you're doing something wrong. Will Ospreay had something like with Dave Meltzer's ratings. I'm not even exaggerating. You know, maybe 10 5-star or more matches last year, and I think maybe got to like 7 stars on some. Everything he does is trying to put on the greatest match you've ever seen in every effort. Now that might sound admirable, right? In some ways, but it's also completely bankrupt, you know, like it shouldn't be that way. You know, they can't all be 6-star matches, or none of them are.
I have dealt with Dave Meltzer even back in my day, and I always found him to be a great guy. And I admire his reporting skills. And
Absolutely.
people equate his opinions with his reporting skills. They are two different things, right? He is first and foremost a reporter, and has delivered more meat and potatoes news to wrestling fans in the last 30, 40 years than anybody else I can think of.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's no question about that. However, the rating system is just an opinion. You don't have to live and die by it, but too many people do. I don't understand even why. I've seen some matches that some people probably thought were god awful, but I love them because there's just something about them I enjoyed. It's like, it's up to the individual. Don't let anybody, lead you around by the nose and say, because there were 47 flips and 72 pinfall attempts, it's the greatest thing we've ever seen.
Yeah.
That's up for you to decide. I mean, it's like a sport. Some people like a 10-2 baseball game. Other people like a 1-0 baseball game. Some like the other better than the others. I guess the point I'm trying to make is, I don't care about a star rating system. I never have. I still don't. It's all, but I must admit it's reaching the point of self-parody now when your 5 goes to 6 and one guy has 10 or 12 of them, whereas Kurt Angle has 2 in his whole career.
No. You know how many Kurt Angle has?
No, 0. That's right. 0.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I can't cotton to it. And God love you, Dave. And I admire you, but I don't care. That's just me. But I also have the ability to let the run off my back and go do something else. Other people get all hot and bothered by it. I say, stay cool.
However you feel about it as a fan or a writer, whether you get heated about it or not, whatever. Where it's a problem is when you're booking a promotion, and I say it somewhat facetiously, but I think it is clear that those mean a lot to Tony Khan. Those star ratings. Right. So you get these, and again, God bless them. I couldn't agree with you more about Meltzer being a terrific reporter, and again, this is what I do, so I appreciate it. I think in a way that a lot of other people don't, and I think very often with great reporters, the best work you never see, right? You don't see all these conversations he's having with people on all levels of the business where he's getting this news. He, with all due respect, he's never been a very good writer. I think he's actually a very bad writer in terms of structure. He's got these run-on sentences that go on forever. I grew up reading more Wade Keller, and Wade Keller is a very good writer. I don't think was the reporter that Meltzer was, but I thought Wade Keller had really good analysis and was a very good, clean writer, but never had the reporting chops that Meltzer had. Yeah, I totally agree. Meltzer's a terrific reporter, and I think a legend in wrestling. But yeah, I think it is becoming a parody, and I think in some ways AEW has brought out his worst traits. I was hearing they're putting together their awards issue now, which is a fan vote, and hearing a discussion yesterday on his podcast talking about like the big candidates, and I mean it's laughable. Look, to each his own, but talking about, he'd say the top 3 shows of the year events were AEW shows. He said it would be very close wrestler of the year between Will Ospreay and Cody Rhodes this year. And again, to each his own. To me, I disagree. I was going to call it laughable. I don't want to insult anybody, but come on. I mean, like what Cody Rhodes did in 2024 was it moved the business. I mean, he was filling stadiums night after night and putting on terrific matches. Will Ospreay was putting on these epic 6-7 star matches night after night after night. Sometimes legitimately in front of a few hundred fans.
Yeah, but there's another factor why these quote 6-star matches are so bad. 6 broken vertebrae soon.
Oh, absolutely.
These guys are working way too hard, even on television, guys flinging through, panes of glass.
Yeah.
Seriously, guys. I still think wrestlers are to be admired for what they do to become wrestlers and what they do in the ring. They're just fantastic athletes. Call me an old softy. I don't want to see somebody get seriously hurt or lose their career over a spot. I think it's irresponsible. And I think the fact that Tony Khan encourages it, I can't cotton to that. I just can't.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's where it stops being a matter of taste. You could say, I like this kind of this kind of wrestling presentation. I like this kind of presentation. I like one that is more story based. I like one that's more athletic based. Where I think some of this is sort of like empirically the case is that this dangerous stuff is stupid and it shouldn't be happening. And you're right. If in as much as Tony Khan is signing off on this, I think it's disgraceful. Some of it is among the guys that are held up. I mean, I see Will Ospreay do some stuff that is so incredibly dangerous to himself, to his opponents. There's a spot. Does he do it, or does he have done it to him? Where like they just dump him head first on the ring a corner. Oh, it's inexcusable. You'd think Tony Khan coming up essentially in the same generation of that I did, and seeing what happened to Chris Benoit and to so many other people would know better.
Yeah.
But you have some of the most dangerous, not since ECW are we seeing the level of dangerous bump taking
Right.
on the Yarny in AEW.
Listen, from superstar Billy Graham to Big E, right? There's different types of injury that can occur, not from being careless, for just doing the wrong thing at the wrong time, and I just wish they were a little more cognizant of that. It's like there are bloodborne diseases and one move can end a career. So I'm just saying, how much do you need? It's like I some of these matches, I look at them and I'm like, how are these guys not like hurt? And actually they are, really, to be honest, when you think about it.
Yeah. And that really is a lack of leadership, because I think, and you see that kind of thing in the indies, right? I mean, there are loads of videos you can watch on YouTube of guys jumping off of the roof of some field house in front of 20 fans at some indie show, and it's idiotic. But you would expect much more out of like, this mud wrestling outlaw stuff. But when you see it on Turner Television, and the thread there between the two of them is letting wrestlers do what they want, right? And when you allow that, when there's nobody there to say no, the famous story that came out of this is CM Punk leaving AEW, right? And you had Jack Perry with wanting to do a bump through actual glass, a glass windshield of a rental car. As the story goes, Shivani told him, no, don't do that. And veteran after veteran told him, no, don't do that. And then Punk finally told him, like, you are not doing that. And what happened? I mean, Perry wanted to go do it anyway. And Punk goes to Khan and says, do something about it, or I'm going to do something about it. And Tony Khan did nothing about it, right? And it really feels, I think it's part of the reason why so many wrestlers express so much admiration for Tony Khan, who I don't doubt is a perfectly nice dude, because he lets them do whatever they want. But that's not being a good boss, that's being the fun boss, but that's not being a good boss.
Too much of a good thing. Like I love a Kit Kat bar, but I can't eat 6 of them. Sure. And when you see a match, right, where it's all dangerous spot after dangerous spot, not only is it dangerous, it gets as boring as a side headlock. I think.
Oh, it's too much. Again, that
the overkill can become boring.
That match that people were heralding, that I saw in Flushing with Fletcher and Ospreay versus the Young Bucks. I might call it the worst match that I saw all year. I thought it was horrible. I mean, it was laughable how bad it was. And I went to a Ring of Honor show a few weeks ago in the Hammerstein Ballroom. And I used to go to the Final Battle shows all the time in Hammerstein. This is the first one in like 10 years that they did there, as they're doing a series of AEW tapings, and they did ROH on Friday night. So I hadn't got to a Ring of Honor show since Tony Khan bought it. And there was, as Tony Khan shows do, this was now like in its 4th hour or something like that. And you're still like several matches away from the main event. And then they bring out a 6-man, not a tag team, a 6 a person, a match for, I don't even remember what the title was, the Ring of Honor TV title or something like that. And it is action, huge spots, near falls, nobody's selling anything. And now we're like 20 minutes into this, and somebody gets pinned, and I'm like, all right, finally. And they announce so and so has been eliminated, and it's like, what? We've got to go through 5 more of these. It was a 6-person elimination match. So like it was 20 minutes to that, and now you had to eliminate five more people, I believe, maybe 4. I remember it was 5 people.
4 probably.
People.
Yeah.
But oh my God, this thing went on what felt like an eternity. It was like 40 minutes, 45 minutes long. There was great stuff. There was like great action in it. But I was so deadened by the end. I thought it was a terrible match. And then the main event. No, there was 2 main events after that. There was a world title match after that, and then the women's world title, which headlined it. So this was third from the top, and they did this. I mean, that is just bad wrestling booking. And I go to WrestleMania most years, and I went to WrestleMania this past year, and they had to pay off WrestleMania after 2 nights with the biggest match in wrestling: Roman Reigns and Cody Rhodes. Cody finishing the story, ending the historic long reign of Roman Reigns. The Rock is involved. It's WrestleMania 40. You've got 70,000 people in this building. It completely paid off. And that meant throughout that night and throughout the previous night, having some matches that were, 8 minutes long, and they weren't swinging for the fences on everything. Some matches were a lot of fun. Some matches were just fine, and it kind of ebbed and flowed, and they ended. To your example, I'm the big Bon Jovi fan. You wouldn't open with Living on a Prayer and then do Living on a Prayer in the middle of the set and then close with Living.
Yeah. No, listen, there's got to be an ebb and flow. You can kill off a good main event with too much before it. You can have an excellent final match on a card, but people get burnt out. If you bring them to a fever pitch, let's say twice within an hour, by the time the main event comes around, they're sitting on their hands no matter what's going on.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot to get them back up again.
Yeah.
And again,
deliberately.
You need pacing. WWE is so much better at that than AEW. I don't think AEW considers it just hot shot after hot shot.
No, I mean, this last pay-per-view that they did, World's End, which had some terrific matches on it. They opened with what I think Meltzer called the greatest opening match in the history of wrestling. Will Ospreay and Kyle Fletcher in kind of a bloodbath match, just a terrific match. I mean, I couldn't say otherwise. A great match, and then had 2 other tournament matches that were all good. And I just watched it yesterday because I heard so many good things. Okada and Ospreay in the finale that Okada won, and it was a terrific match. And I actually didn't think it was too excessive. I think it was just a really good match. Did all this and then did the main event, and it was like a 4-way, garbage match. That's just a mess. How do you not end with Okada winning the Continental Classic, Kenny Omega coming up? I don't know. Again, the inmates are running the asylum over there.
Yeah. Well, the reason I had you on was to talk about the juxtaposition between the big cards of the past and the one you just saw. I will say this. I was at the first SummerSlam, which was Hogan and Randy Savage against Andre and DiBiase, the mini Elizabeth striptease. The only special effect they had in the whole show was a different ring skirt. That was it. Yeah. There was no pyro. There was no big deal. It was just match after match. It just goes to show you the difference in today's wrestling and how it's presented and how plainly it was back in 88, 89, 90. I mean, even then they were moving up in terms of spectacle, as it were.
I went to,
do you feel sometimes there's too much sizzle and not enough steak, though? Do you think sometimes the special effects and all the accoutrement can kind of dull the senses a little bit too much?
Well, I mean, I'll say that to this day, my favorite thing to do, and if I, it is a lot less frequent now than it was for years and years. As a wrestling fan, my favorite thing is a WWE house show, right? I mean, and even now, WWE house shows have a lot of sizzle. They did try to bring a lot of that TV production level to the live events. It's been a while, but I went to a house show at the Coliseum in September of 2023. that was, I remember it was Cody in the main event. I don't remember who he wrestled, but sometimes in that old building with the lights out and just a light on the ring, it could be 1987 again,
Right, right.
and I love it. I mean, there's nothing that I love as much as just a house show. It's so pure and kind of nostalgic. To Triple H's credit, again, I think in some ways he has pulled back. One of the things that and I don't know if he deserves the credit or the new production team that he's got. Lee Fitting, right, is the guy who's had some controversy surrounding him, but he's got there are fresh eyes over there, and one of the super counterintuitive things that they did was get rid of that big Raw stage, right, the big set with the Titantron, and just from a business standpoint, it's so smart. Even when wrestling was really hot in the late 90s, they were giving up so much real estate in these buildings with this huge stage, which meant you're not selling tickets for like a third or a quarter of the building.
Mm-hmm.
And now they do away with that. It is a very simple stage, kind of like what you would have seen at a SummerSlam 88,
Mm-hmm.
where it's just kind of the logo and a set of doors, a little more than that. But what looks more major league than a giant stage and pyro and all that. What looks better than that is a packed arena, and
Right.
that's what they're doing. Is that's all fans now. It's a great change. Again, you balance like the nostalgia and the purity of the wrestling that you grew up with an appreciation that they are looking to, as we're recording this and Raw on Netflix, as I understand it. And I don't know if you've seen some of these pictures. I could just turn over here and look. There's logos, ads all over the ring canvas now.
Yeah, I saw a photo
Huge
of that.
no for years, and that's
Yeah.
evolution. And I don't care either. I mean, I think it's
Yeah, they did Renegade chewing tobacco in Memphis. Who cares? That's
yeah.
in the 80s. I mean, this is nothing new.
No, yeah, and I think they're smart to monetize. A thing that reminds me of that they did at Saturday Night's Main Event, and I had never heard of this, and I don't know how well it worked, but I think this is right out of like Disney World, that they essentially like did a thing where we're going to count down from 5 and say cheese. Everybody in the building will have a photo taken of them in their seat. And then you scan the barcode that was on the big thing and you log on, and there's your picture at Saturday night's main event that I suppose you could purchase for a price.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's brilliant. I mean, like I didn't check it and I didn't buy it, but like, if they could figure out new ways to monetize things.
Oh, that's nothing new either. They've been doing that at Met games for 10 years now. So a photographer will come around to your seat and go,
Sure,
you two look cozy. Can I take your
I've
picture?
had that
Sure.
at restaurants.
And then they will try to attempt. They give you a card, say if you want to buy this, log on to this and get your photo.
Yeah,
I'm like, even as you sit there, they're going to get some money out of your pocket. Even as you sit waiting for nothing to happen.
Yeah. One thing we haven't talked about in terms of like the live experience that is worth bringing up, that is a huge degradation from where things were, but also a necessity, is getting into the building.
Oh yeah.
And the Coliseum, Mass Coliseum, is the dirt worst. I mean, and it was freezing cold December. The line wrapped around the Coliseum parking lot for a mile. Everybody goes through the metal detector one by one. It's brutal, and again, the Coliseum in particular is, even the Garden, even for being the Garden, it actually moves a lot faster, and even like MetLife Stadium where they've got 70,000 people, but security. But I mean, you get it post 9/11 world. Getting into a building, and it just, like I was saying, I mean, I these days, like if I go to my barber and there's one person waiting, I'm not going to stay. Right, I'm going back home. But that's the one place where there's. I mean, if you want to get in the building, you're going to have to wait on the line.
Yeah, that's the way of the world now, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Well, anyway, Al, it's great to have you back.
Yeah, definitely. We'll do it again.
And you know, the fact that you would devote even this amount of time to being on the show, I really appreciate it, because I know you and Brian are doing the PWI podcast, right? What's the
Yeah.
schedule? What's the schedule for that? Let's not neglect that.
You know, I should probably be better about keeping a schedule, but in part because all of us at the magazine, you know, we have day jobs and stuff. It could be difficult to um get things lined up. So it's usually a lot of false starts. Can you do Tuesday? No. Can you do Wednesday? Yes, but only at this time. And then you finally land on something. But on average, we're probably doing every other week. We're doing a show. We're due for one. Certainly. And this year is in 2025, I believe it's the 10th anniversary of the PWI podcast. So
congratulations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Jeez, we just did our 100th episode. We almost had a parade. You guys are doing way more than that.
Well, that's the thing. I think over 10 years, we probably don't have that many more than that. I mean, I think we're less than 300 over 10 years. So yeah, I mean, sometimes we could go a while. But again, it is kind of like a little side hustle and not our bread and butter, you know?
Right. But you know what? It's a good show, and I want to direct people to go and listen to that too.
Yeah.
Especially when a new one comes out, you guys talk about a lot of current things that are going on, and you know, I'm a fan of both of yours, so I give it my ear, and I hope other people do too.
Yeah, Brian's great. You could get us at pwi-online.com. Yeah, we talk current events. We'll usually have another writer on, and a lot of kind of like inner workings of putting together the magazine. So yeah, a fun listen. Definitely go check it out.
Yeah, and before I let you go, as a Queens guy who was in Long Island a lot, I really enjoy a kosher restaurant called Ben's Deli in Carl Place. Right next to it is a big old honking Barnes & Noble with the best magazine rack in all of Nassau County. It's like 5 magazine racks.
I was there 2 days ago.
Oh, really? And that's where I get my PWIs. I like the old school feeling of grabbing it off a newsstand. It's what I grew up doing, and I'm never going to give up that. I know I can subscribe, and I know there's a digital version and all that stuff, but that's how I get my PWIs. And again, I am so proud of you guys for not only continuing on with the legacy of PWI, but also honing it into something that's modern and really, really fresh. And I can't express my admiration enough to everybody there, including Kevin and everybody else, because it's terrific.
I appreciate that, and certainly we have nothing but respect and admiration for you and your generation that really paved the way. And you know, I always say this. I mean, I think I fanboy out more for PWI writers from the 80s and 90s than I do for wrestlers.
You know something. I don't get intimidated at the prospect of talking to wrestlers. I get intimidated talking to Brian R. Solomon and Greg Oliver and the journalists, because I consider them like 50 steps over anything I ever did with PWI, because I read a lot of kayfabe articles. It was more creative writing than it was the real meat and potatoes journalism that they do. And there were times when I did that for sure. But the fact that like Brian's coming out with another book on Gorilla Monsoon now, and the Meltzers of the world, these are the people I give the ultimate props, and you and people like that, because it's like you're doing a harder thing, I think, for me. It would have been a harder job for me if I had to stick to straight journalistic. Because I was honed in news writing, like I said, and I did a lot of sports writing, but times have changed, and it's a different style of writing now, even in PWI. Although I know I saw the name Dr. Sidney N. Basil in a recent issue.
Can you believe he's still?
What is he? 113?
Yes, we found him somewhere. He still keeps some hours. Yeah.
So for you old timer fans out there, buy PWI. You never know when Dr. Sidney M. Basil and Matt Brock are going to show up. Who knows?
Matt is still lighter scheduled than he used to, but yes, Matt.
Yeah, but I hear he's still putting him back, and he's got to cut down a little bit. You know, it's ridiculous.
He's the Keith Richards of
PWI. That's right. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, from Pro Wrestling Illustrated, it's Al Castle. Al, what a pleasure. Thanks again, man.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it.
Well, that puts a nice little bow on the meanderings for this edition. We hope you enjoyed Al Castle. I really like Al. I really like Brian Solomon. I really like Kevin at PWI. It is a new golden era for that magazine right now. I suggest you go grab some issues. It won't let you down. It's the most informative publication of its kind in the United States of America. And I'm choosing my words wisely. There's nothing to compare it to here. And they're doing a fantastic job. Slick paper now, full color, square binding, great photography, excellent writing. As my old friend Ed Norton used to say, what's not to like? So check out PWI at your earliest convenience. Write to us at outdatedwrestling@gmail.com. Our website is outdatedwrestlinghour.buzzsprout.com, where all of our editions, all of our episodes are all listed, and you can listen to each one there. I will not Patreon you for our back episodes. Find me on Facebook as Bob Smith. I'm the only Bob Smith that's singing with B.B. King. Speaking of B.B. King, I've got on the Entertainment Hour coming up, Tony Coleman. Can you believe it? Tony Coleman, B.B. King's drummer for many, many years and a major blues star in his own right. We're going to look back at B.B. King and see what's going on with Tony. And Tony played on one of my albums as Robert Charles. The album was called Metropolitan Blue. And he is, well, the way I put it, he's a dynamite basher, man. He can go. So look forward to that, too. You can also find me on Blue Sky. I'm Outdated Bob. Threads, I'm Outdated Bob. And Instagram. I think I'm Outdated Bob there, too, to be honest with you. I'm not mentioning any other social media outlets because that's it now. Those are the ones I'm choosing to hang around at. So Facebook is my main jam for announcements and things like that. But there will be announcements on all the others as well. So I'm looking forward to you checking us out there, too. We are available at every podcast app I can think of. I'm sure there may be something out there we're not at. And there's plenty of them that I just was made aware of recently. I don't know how they picked the show up, but they do. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcast, be it Apple or Spotify or TuneIn or wherever you like to listen. If you subscribe, it does help quite a bit. So we'd appreciate it if you would. We have a lot of great guests coming up in the weeks ahead. Use Facebook and the other places for announcements and things like that, if you'd be so kind. And that's it for now. Thank you again, Al Castle. PWI, man. Again, I can't believe how lucky I was to even get that job. And it just won't let me go. I keep saying that. People remember me from it. So why not? Let's keep talking about it, you know? Let's talk about the old wrestlers we used to love from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and so on. Even 2000s. 2000s is a long time ago now, you know? So, as you know, I'm older than dirt, and that's why this is the Outdated Wrestling Hour. My name's Bob Smith. We'll see you next time. We always quote Ringo Starr. He used to say peace and love, but you know what? His old partner, John Lennon, was every bit as peaceful. Paul, too. George, especially. All right, I got to go put on some Beatles now. Jeez.